So for today, thank you all for jumping on the call today. I'm really excited, I think, for this specific topic. I know a lot of us are sort of really excited about this specifically. A lot of our communities are working with, advancing coordinated entry and really, figuring out ways to build in employment questions into that. I think it's something that's very exciting to a lot of folks, and I've got a couple of emails that this is a really exciting topic for folks. So, and I know also one of the benefits of the Connections Project is that a lot of us are leaders in our community on this topic, and so this is it gives us a chance to really sort of formulate what's been working for us, what are some of our thoughts, and really sort of build out some triage questions that other communities can use as they start to fold in employment questions into their coordinated entry. So as I mentioned to Carrie earlier, we are going to have some slides on in the background, but those aren't really sort of it's not a formal presentation. It's just more of a way to record these calls for folks who aren't able to make it, and to sort of have access to that for folks to share to their groups and their partners if need be. So we do the flexibility to move around, and we're hoping this is more of an organic conversation for all of us to sort of talk about this topic here. So just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today, and then we'll jump right into some of the discussion parts. Quick rundown, we'll do a welcome, and then myself or Melissa will outline some of the goals for the call. And then we'll jump into some of the questions. I think these are questions that have been generated from a lot of extensive work from our coordinated entry working group. They spent a lot of time and expertise. We've generated some questions from that. So everything that group has produced has informed us up to this point. And so we're hoping these might be good guideposts for sample questions. So for that, we'll have Nick Codd and Danielle from our Seattle site highlight some of their own thinking on the subject and sort of walk us through these sample questions and stimulate some feedback from all of our sites to really sort of help us build out, is this what we're looking for? Does this really get at are these the correct questions to ask folks at entry to get them pointed in the right direction for employment? And also, I think earlier, we really want to stimulate a good discussion. I thought, John's email earlier today was really sort of what we're looking for, to really sort of build out a larger discussion on our thoughts on this, to eventually sort of produce something, a one-pager or recommendations afterwards. So that's sort of the heart there. And then thirdly, we'll touch on some next steps and talk about, again, what we'll produce hopefully at the end of this call. So for that, I think we'll move into the welcome section. Again, thank you all for being flexible and sort of, going with the flow for the reschedule. I apologize for having to move this back a little bit, but I'm really glad to have you all back, and I'm really excited about this because I think this represents, we are all on the leading edge, I think, of this discussion, and I think a lot of folks outside of this, the network that we built here are excited to hear about what we're doing and our thoughts on this specific topic. So I'm glad and excited to share that with everybody. So what I was thinking, what might make the most sense would be to introduce the Connections Project sites first. So we'll sort of walk down the list of sites, and if for folks who are on the line, feel free to introduce yourself via each site when I call them out. Then we'll move on to our HUD TA partners. If any of our folks are on the call, we'll move to them as well. And any of our peripheral Connection Project sites and our partners as well, we'll introduce them thirdly. And then finally, myself and Melissa will introduce ourselves, and we'll move into the goals and really get into the discussion. So up front, I don't know if anyone from the folks from the Seattle site, if we have anyone from Seattle, feel free to introduce yourself now.
I can start. This is Nick Codd from Building Changes, part of the Seattle King County project.
All right, and my name's Danielle Winslow. I work for All Home and work very closely with Nick Codd on the Seattle project.
Hi all, this is Marcel Wellington with the Workforce Development Council, Seattle King County.
Great. I think those are all the folks from Seattle. If we have anybody from Houston, I think I saw that Heather jumped on. If we have any of our Houston site folks on, feel free to introduce yourselves now.
Yeah, this is Heather Muller with CSH in Houston, attached to our COC lead agency, working on what we're calling Income Now. And I think Gary's on the call too. Gary, are you there?
Yeah, it looks like, I think Gary is on the call. It looks like he's using his speakers. So what we'll try and do is if you look at the top of the agenda, Gary, there's the call-in information there. If you can use your cell phone or your desk phone to call in, that would be fantastic.
And I'll introduce Gary. Gary's project manager with the COC lead agency here in Houston, and he's project managing this Income Now project.
Great. All right. If we have anybody from the Minneapolis site, feel free to introduce yourself now. I think I do know that Heidi is catching up flight actually as we speak. So I'm not sure if Brian or anybody else is on the line, but if not, I'll make sure to pass on everything to them. Okay, I think we'll jump to Chicago. I think I saw Carrie on the line.
Hi, it's Carrie Thomas from the Chicago Jobs Council, and I think Jared and maybe Lauren are on.
Yep, this is Jared Reynolds, also from the Chicago Jobs Council.
Great. And I do see Lauren is called in, but it says she hasn't entered the audio pin. It should be on the right side of your screen there. So if you enter that in, I can unmute you before we get started. And then finally, I think our newest member of the Connections Project site, I think Hannah's on from Baltimore. Feel free to introduce yourself, Hannah.
Hi, everybody. This is Hannah Roberts. I'm with the Journey to Jobs Project in Baltimore. I just started last month, and I'm excited to be on the call.
Great. Welcome, Hannah. So if there's, and I think right now we'll jump to any of the folks from our HUD TA partners. If you are on the line, feel free to introduce yourself now.
Hello, Carl. This is, and everybody, John Rio from Advocates for Human Potential, the TA lead for HUD on these projects.
Great. Hey, John. And I think I did see, I'm going to unmute Tom. It looks like you're called in now, so I'm going to unmute you here. And if you want to introduce yourself, feel free to do so.
Hi, this is Tom Stewart. I'm from CSH in San Diego. We were one of the at the forefront of the Connections project, but just sitting and listening. Thanks for having me.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for joining, Tom. So I think that is everyone, all the folks that are able to be called in. And also, you can just raise your hand if you do switch over and it shows you it's muted. I'll make sure to unmute you throughout the call so we can get those discussions going. And then lastly, I think myself and Melissa will introduce herself. My name is Carl Wiley. I'm the coordinator for the National Center on Employment and Homelessness, and I currently oversee the Connections Project, which all of you I think are somewhat familiar with here. And so I'm really excited to be here today and sort of be part of this call and input my thoughts and ideas into this discussion.
Hi, everybody. This is Melissa Young. I direct Heartland Alliance's national initiatives on poverty and economic opportunity. All of our national initiatives focus on ending chronic unemployment and poverty, and our National Center on Employment and Homelessness is one of our national initiatives focused on raising employment as an element of preventing and ending homelessness. I think Amy Reinell is also on the line. Amy, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Good afternoon, everybody. I oversee the research and policy work at Heartland Alliance.
That's great. That's our team. So I think with that, we would start to jump in. I want to leave plenty of time for us to really sort of have some discussion and dig into this topic a little bit more. So let's jump in a little bit. We'll talk about our goals for today. I'll pass it over to Melissa in a second, but really, I think just up front, we really want to leverage the expertise of everybody here. All of our Connection Project sites and all of the folks that have joined the call are, I think, represent some of the smartest minds in the field, and so it would be a missed opportunity not to leverage your thoughts and perspective on this specific topic. So I'm excited about this and to sort of articulate something we can put out to folks in the near future.
Great. Thanks so much, Carl, and thanks everybody for joining us. This is Melissa again, and I'm just going to give just a brief sort of background about how we got to the document that Carl emailed everyone with the agenda, and again, our goal for today. our work thinking about coordinated assessment and entry and the role that employment could play in that process was really got started through all of you and the work that you're doing in communities and the questions that you began to raise with us. So for many of you, you'll probably recall in the fall, we convened a small group of folks to begin thinking about what types of employment questions might live within the homeless system's coordinated entry and assessment process that would begin to triage individuals who are entering into the homeless system on a range of basic employment questions. We received a ton of feedback from folks across the country, from all of you who are working on these issues, and really began to take each of your different tools and communities and begin to narrow them down into a set of finite questions. So what you have in front of you and what Carl emailed out was sort of our draft document, but the latest of our thinking based on your input of what triage questions might exist in a homeless system coordinated assessment or coordinated intake process. I'll say that our goal today is to walk through these questions and to really get your feedback. What's missing? What do we need to add? And your reactions to these questions. We recognize that in the long term, we're really looking at a two-part process. We're looking at developing a set of questions that communities may use to kind of get their process started of including employment questions in the coordinated entry process. Recognizing that the second part of this process is to really begin to assess the workforce needs, motivations, and aptitudes of individuals entering the system. And that assessment process is a much longer process. But for today's call, we're really focusing on a set of triage questions that we want to get you guys' input on. Again, the goal of what we're developing here is to, in the next few weeks, take your input, take these questions, and produce a set of sample questions and roll it out to communities nationwide, giving communities sort of a template to use as they begin to develop out coordinated assessment and entry systems that include employment questions. So that's kind of a little bit of the background and our goal for today. I'd love to turn it back over to Carl and over to our Seattle team who will help facilitate our conversation. Maybe before I do, just maybe open it up to everyone on the call for reactions to the document that we shared with everybody, and then we can kind of continue the discussion from there.
Hi, Melissa. This is Marcel Wellington in Seattle.
Hi there, Marcel.
I have just a clarifying question in your introduction of this two-part process. The second part, you said in assessing workforce needs, but I think what you were talking about was the, let's just call them the job seeker needs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. And other than that, as I looked through the questions, I thought the questions on the draft that Carl sent were pretty thorough.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, that's good to hear. Yeah, that's good to hear, and thank you. Yeah, if we weren't terribly clear, sorry about that. We recognize that that oftentimes in communities, maybe not every community, but oftentimes in communities, a set of triage questions as someone walks in the door might be handled by someone in the homeless services system, but doing a deeper dive assessment of worker needs or worker aptitudes or motivation or work readiness, those kinds of questions require a more thorough assessment oftentimes and may not be done by the workforce system itself. It may be done at the workforce center or by a community-based service provider who is serving or is implementing workforce services. yeah, hopefully that makes it a little bit more clear. But other, you know, other reactions, feedback on this document, I think we're especially, you know, looking for things that are missing or that we you know, kind of we didn't reflect back your feedback in the way that you'd like to have it seen in the document.
This is Heather Muller in Houston. I think it's pretty solid. I mean, especially if you're trying to get something out kind of across lots of different types of communities. When we were comparing all of ours, that was one of the things that I was struggling with. How do you create something that is semi-universal, but allows enough room for each community that's, you know, really, the thing I wasn't sure about is it depends what your coordinated access is connecting people to or what it does. It's just assessing or it's entry, it's all those things. But I think for a first cut, that's kind of a little bit of a generic starting point for all communities. This is probably pretty solid. The only other thing would be then, what does it match to? Or
right.
You know, like these questions, they end up where? I think that would, you know, if I was a community, I'd be like, this is awesome. Okay, just give me the next tool and then I'm ready to go.
Right.
Heather, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Perhaps on our end, it would be wise for us to consider maybe a few sentences on the tool that articulate sort of a need for a gap analysis in communities, right? Or a need for sort of an assessment about what's out there as part of this process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, you know, part of the idea of sort of a quick triage and pointing someone in the right direction is really having that service on the other end to connect them to. I think that's really great. And it sort of harkens back to our previous discussion about asset mapping. You know, what is out there and how do we connect folks to it? These are sort of the yin and yang to the referral process. That's great. And also, you know, to Melissa's point, I think that, you know, one of the things we recognize that there is going to be some local variance on this. You know, communities really will, you know, maybe it will add some things particular to their community, but also may subtract some things that just, you know, aren't necessarily as common as we thought. And that's one of the things we're looking for, you know, but it sounds like some things are pretty common, but are there things that stick out that maybe people think we should dig a little deeper on or that stand out as you know, flagging some things in people's minds when they first saw this? Okay. All right. Well, I think with that, what we might start doing is moving towards really just sort of breaking down maybe those questions we sent around individually. I thought might be a really good way to sort of break them down, and maybe that might stimulate some, you know, viewpoints, and maybe people have encountered this before and might generate some thoughts on that. Before we jump into that, let me skip ahead here. So I thought of a couple initial questions that would, for us to think about going into, you know, the opening discussion with Nick and Danielle. But really, sort of, you know, what employment assessment, you know, questions are people currently using? I thought, you know, Heather brought up a really great thing. Where are we sending people? What's the next step? What's the second part of this? Another question we sort of came up with initially, and for people to think about, are what are some of the helpful categories, you know, or buckets of areas we want to focus on to think about moving through. And also hearkening back to, I think, the conversation that Carrie led late last year, but, you know, how can we connect with the workforce system? And what are some ways we've been able to do that thus far? So by no means are these, you know, sort of exhaustive, but I thought we should, you know, to start turning the gears and getting us thinking, this would be a good way to sort of do so. So that's just some food for thought there. Sorry. So a little bit, just really quickly on sort of leading up to this. These here, you can see, these are all of the so the matrix of the questions that all the folks had from our 3 sites, from Chicago, Destination Jobs, Team Houston, and Seattle's Home and Work. They were all part of the Coordinated Entry Working Group. So these are the sort of matrix of those questions that ended up blending together to form the stuff that I sent around to everybody today. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nick and Danielle which we're fortunate enough to be joined by today. And I think, you know, Seattle's really been on the forefront of coordinated entry and has really had a chance to really sort of see what's happening and really sort of inform the field and be leaders on this. So we thought they'd be natural arbiters, I think, for this discussion here. But hopefully throughout this conversation we can dig into, like, are we covering the basics? Are we missing some things? Are any of the sections misleading? You know, we maybe want to avoid specific, you know, nitpicking on words, but I think we want to make sure that we're clear with what we're saying. So if there are some things that are sticking out for folks, make sure that we can call those out as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Danielle, who've been doing a lot of thought on this recently. And I included that that matrix that for Nick and Danielle that you sent me as well, so we can start with that and sort of walk us through any thoughts and ideas you have on each question.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Carl. So I'll get us started. And just a little sort of point of clarification, I suppose. So Danielle and I are from Seattle, work out of Seattle. The county we're in is King, so you'll oftentimes hear us talk about King County, not just Seattle. So because our work is really a county-wide project. So I would say that you know, this document that's been put together and all the conversation that we've had today, you know, so far anyways, is a good setup to kind of introduce what we're working on here in Seattle, King County. So I would say that we have certainly gone back and forth between, like everybody, what are the important questions, who should be asking those questions, when should those questions be asked. And so what we have come up with here is really sort of what you're looking at, and basically it's some very straightforward, simple questions, and so we see this in our community anyway as sort of a triage process, and you know, as Heather brought up in talking about sort of the questions we're looking at earlier, you know, where does this all lead to? Where does this, you know, where is the match? And so for our community, one of the things we're trying to do is figure out where people would end up in one of three pathways, and I'll get into all of that in just a second. But I guess just a little bit of sort of background on what we're doing here. So King County is in the process of both expanding coordinated entry out to all populations and then redesigning the coordinated entry process that we've been using for the past 2 to 3 years, which has really been focused primarily on families and young adults. So the timing for us is good. It's a time where things are going to be changing, and so this is a time for us to incorporate a change, and again, the change for us is beginning this conversation around employment and income at coordinated entry. So in King County, last year and the year before, we did a project where we paired employment navigation with rapid rehousing. We had this very tight, intentional partnership, and it worked well. But what we learned from the project was that the conversation around income and employment, well, it's great to have it start as people are starting a rapid rehousing program. The conversation needs to start, you know, as soon as possible or earlier back in the whole process. So that's one of the reasons why we're really trying to start this conversation at coordinated entry. The other thing that I think we're trying to look at as we figure out, you know, what questions to ask and how to go about this is that, you know, we know that we're serving a broad range of households, broad range of needs. We also know that for the most part right now, the primary housing service that households are going to be participating in is rapid rehousing. And if not rapid rehousing, something that we refer to as diversion, which is even a shorter term intervention. So what that really means, as we all know, is that for people to make rapid rehousing work, they're going to need to have income to support their housing at the end of rental subsidies, and the rental subsidies are very short term oftentimes, 3 months, 6 months, maybe 12 months, maybe a bit longer. So I think the context of the type of housing service that people are going to be getting, and in particular the change we've seen in our system and the movement towards rapid rehousing and sort of in addition to more sort of long-term subsidized housing, this really plays into this income and employment conversation, and it sort of increases the urgency and the need for income more and more as we look at all this. So the other thing I would just say as far as context is that our triage would be part of a bigger meeting and discussion, and it's done by a coordinated entry staff person, and they will be using the VI SPDAT. So some of the information that would be gathered through that process will sort of line up and help to inform the whole employment and income conversation. So that's another part of the context. So really what we are suggesting here is that the coordinated entry staff person have a conversation. It would not be a form necessarily, but really just a conversation. The type of information we'd start with is, what are the current sources of income the person has? And on our format, on one side we have earned income and unemployment insurance, and we feel that people who have one of those may be likely candidates for eventually what we're seeing is our pathway A, sort of a lighter service focus. And then in the middle we have things like TANF and ABD HEN. That's a local type of assistance here in the state of Washington, but it's time limited. It's not like SSI or SSDI, food stamps. So these are people that would be on different types of public assistance that's time limited and also doesn't pay a lot, doesn't offer a lot, and then move more over into the direction of SSI and SSDI. So that would be sort of the first question. And Carl, you could probably go back to that to the diagram site. Yeah. And then no problem. And then really it's just a series of very, very basic questions. Would you like to take a look at increasing your income? Do you need to increase your income? And some people are going to say not at this time, and that could be for a variety of reasons. They may already be working and have enough income. They don't feel like this is the right time. Or it simply, just isn't something that they're interested in at all. So we want to build in an opportunity for people who say not at this time, but who are going to need to increase their income to have that conversation again at some later point. And that's part of our broader work in our Connections project. And then just the next obvious question, is employment or training, would that help? Is that something you're interested in? Would that help with your income? And in acknowledging that there will be some people who whose main focus would be to get onto something like SSI or SSDI or VA benefits, and may not be interested in employment or training, and we that's our pathway C, so we want to be able to respond to that need, and then just working our way down. If you're interested, would you like assistance? What do you think would be helpful to you? And if it's a yes, then our question of what do you think are your largest barriers? What are your needs? What's holding you back? And I think this is the type of question that we've elected at this point anyway to sort of just have a broad question, conversational style question. But a lot of what we would expect to come up here would be the things that that you see in the form that that Heartland has put together that sort of combines all of our questions. Interests, how long people have been unemployed, why they lost jobs, things like that. So we feel that this approach is a comfortable approach that, again, somebody whose real orientation is around housing and sort of making that coordinated entry assessment would feel very comfortable being able to use. And so at the end of this conversation, then households would go in one of three directions. So pathway C, again, would be the SSI, SSDI, benefits only track. And that would obviously not be something that the employment arena would be responsible for the most part, or they would go to what we consider a path A or a path B. And so on pathway we have this term light service, pathway B, medium and high service, and we know we have to be very careful with that type of terminology because those are very relative terms. you can talk, you talk to different people in light and medium high, or they mean something different to everybody. But in our case, and Carl, you can probably go to the next slide at this point.
Sure.
So yeah, so Pathway A is really somebody that could go straight from coordinated entry to a one-stop, or in the state of Washington we call it WorkSource, but basically it's your American Job Center. They could go to a mainstream employment provider, workforce provider with some direction, some like maybe a warm handoff, but for the most part they're self-directed enough, and they have enough sort of that they've figured out that's the right level of service, that's the right pathway for them. The other part of our project is to work with our WorkSource and our mainstream systems, so that when people are referred in that direction, that there's not just a warm body, but somebody there that will that knows they're coming, that there's a structure, that there's a supportive response and environment there, so that is the right place, and people get the right type of support and assistance that they need. And we've had really good conversations to date with our local WorkSource and workforce providers. So we need to continue to work on and build up, but we feel like that's a real, it's a good opportunity, and this is a good opportunity in this project to really strengthen that relationship. So Pathway B is really for households that are going to need some level of navigation or support, and maybe some type of specialized service. They may end up, somebody who goes into Pathway B may end up getting a lot of their eventual services from the mainstream system, but they'll do that because they've gotten this sort of navigation and support that's needed to make that connection. We also, acknowledge that there will be certainly individuals that come through that will need to be involved in our, voc rehab program, people with disabilities, or other types of, like supported employment programs that to really meet the needs of people with mental health and chemical dependency, co-occurring disorders. So that's kind of our approach, and this is right now, it's in theory. We have not actually done this yet. We will be starting probably in the month of March. So like anything else that you plan out and implement, there will be things we'll probably have to adjust as we move forward. The one thing that I do think is really important is that we want this whole process to be very client-centered, but also have this perspective of screening people in, not screening people out. Really like sort of the supported employment zero exclusion approach. If somebody says, yeah, I want to work, I need to work, then it's a question of, let's get started and let's see where you are and what we need to do. Not, it doesn't matter if you want to work or need to work. We don't think you're ready, so come back in 3 months. We don't want that type of approach in any way whatsoever. So we're working with our local community-based organizations, employment programs, our entire system, to ensure that this is a sort of a zero exclusion screen-in process, no wrong doors type of process, for homeless households that they need not only a place to live, but they need employment and income to support that. So that's kind of where we are at this point, and I would be curious to hear if people have questions or any type of response to this.
Hi, this is Carrie in Chicago. I have a couple of questions.
Okay, good.
Can you actually, Carl, could you go back to the first picture?
There we go.
Thank you. So this looks awesome, and I think that I missed what you said when you got to the bottom. What are your largest barriers to working or training? Is there then a more detailed assessment that happens so that you know whether somebody? I'm trying to get to like.
Right.
So did you say that?
No, here's how I'd answer that question. So at this point, we're seeing this as really sort of an open conversation, and not meant to be a deep assessment, but really in the eyes of the the homeless person, what do you think is holding you back? Where do you need help? Where do you see your barriers? And certainly I'm sure that the staff person doing this may prompt them and say, I see that you're on SSI, or I see, just things like that. But it isn't meant to be a real detailed assessment. We feel that the more detailed employment assessment will happen either by the providers in Pathway A or the providers in Pathway B.
So that's what I'm struggling with. So because, like in our conversations, there's been a lot of concern that you make the right kind of referral so that you're not referring somebody somewhere, and maybe it's because we have so many different things here, that somebody is appropriate, like they meet at least some basic criteria. So I really like that, and I think people would really like this simple, just really assessing just the interest in getting something else. But then you might not make the right connection to a provider in Pathway A or a provider in Pathway B, which leads me to my second question, which is, what are you anticipating the training the frontline staff on either side of this equation will need to understand what they're referring to or what they're receiving from?
Yeah, right. Okay, good. So let me start with the first question. So, so the Pathway B, what's behind that, and we're not showing this here, is that we have for families, for youth, and to a certain degree with single adults, we have the capacity to offer what I would call employment navigation services. And so that navigation is where the more detailed conversation and assessment takes place. And as a navigator, one of their responsibilities is to understand, because we're probably like you guys, we have 1,000,001 programs here, and great resources, but figuring out where they are and who should go where is complicated. So I mean, that's another part of our project, is to map all of that out. But we really see the navigators as doing that, and understanding in some cases the navigator may send somebody in a different sense, not back per se, but the transition from B they may go straight into Pathway A very quickly. So we will build in that sort of navigation component that I think does what you're concerned about. The only other thing I'd say is, I'll get to that part. The other thing I would say is that that we really feel like this is an opportunity to broaden the role of our mainstream one-stops, so that Pathway A is not just a trickle, but it's a good number of people, that we can make that work for a good number of people, and that's some of the work that we have to do, and that's the training on both sides. So. And
then Nick, let me, if I don't mind jumping in here. This is Danielle Winslow with also working with Nick on this work, and I just wanted to also chime in for our particular systems. Just like Nick said, we have this navigation component that's kind of built into that Pathway B. One of the strengths of that is that they're actually sitting oftentimes within the WorkSource system. And so it's actually not a very far branch between perhaps this Pathway A and the people that might be able to do a light touch. So I think one of the concerns would be if someone went to Pathway B, then they'd have to bounce back to the coordinated entry and then get to Pathway A. It'd be much more seamless on that other end. But it's also for one of those things as far as, like Nick was saying, trying to build that ability of a Pathway A into that direct work as well.
So who is paying for the navigator?
I knew you were going to ask that question.
And do they have extra money? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Right. So what I will say is we right now we have a team of employment navigators that will be working with families that are funded with a 2-year what we call system innovation grant. These are private dollars, and they come through Building Changes, and so that is private funding that will launch this project. at the same time, we have chosen employment programs to do this work, as Danielle said, that are connected and involved in the mainstream system, that also have some other funding streams that we are asking them to co-enroll families into and start to build a sustainability plan. So all three of these providers receive basic food and employment, BFET dollars. They're all funded by a local King County program, which is called the Homeless Employment Program. So there's not a lot of money there, but there are homeless employment dollars funding these three agencies. Two of the agencies are also funded with WIOA dollars. Another one is a Work First or a TANF provider. So we've chosen organizations that have other funding streams, and we're hoping to leverage that and build on that. However, our dollars, which aren't a lot, they will go away in 2 years, and we'll need to figure out just what it will mean to sustain things as they're being set up at this point. So that's one of our tasks over the next 2 years, is how to do all that. And that's why I really, one of my long-term goals is to broaden Pathway A so that Pathway B will be, I think, easier to sustain moving forward. So,
Nick, John Rio.
Sure.
I like your flow chart. It's really very neat and sweet. It reflects the matrix that I had sent out earlier, and I like the all-inclusive kind of approach. Makes good sense for a triage tool. The one thing that I'm trying to figure out in this, and I'm wondering what other people think as well, is how do you handle somebody who has an active arrest warrant when they're coming in the front door, or who are here illegally, and how to respond to them in the triage process, or do you process them, and if you don't, where do you ask that kind of a question?
Yeah, so I'll start, and Danielle, you can jump in. So I think, my feeling is that an active arrest warrant, that's a question that is that should be asked not just in relationship to employment, but housing as well, because we all know there's no point in developing a big housing plan on somebody that could be picked up and gone is not a good plan. So I think that's something that that ideally would be identified by the housing person, and that's something that would be addressed as sort of prior to a lot of employment and housing plans, because that's a real sort of crisis or urgent type of thing that needs to be addressed. And then the other question of undocumented people who aren't here legally, our housing and employment system is working with individuals that are in that situation. What we know is that it means different options, fewer options in some cases, around both housing and employment. But we do proceed with both, and obviously they're not going to be served with WIOA funds. They're not going to be they're not going to have access to some of the things in our community, but we do have some things that we can offer people, and we have to date served people that are undocumented from both a housing and employment standpoint. Not easy, but it happens.
So the undocumented person could go through this flow process, as just may have a constricted level of service available to them. And and the person who's criminally involved currently, we would all hope that that's picked up as part of the housing piece, or depending upon how this is woven with the housing questions that come into play, that it would certainly be addressed.
Yeah, that's my take on it. just because, it is one of those situations where, if you don't resolve that, then all other plans will be always in jeopardy, at risk. So.
This is Danielle again. I think the only thing that I would just emphasize, not really add to, but Nick kind of ended his presentation of this was really like we were very intentional about staying away from language around like ready to work or not ready to work, or a few things need to happen in order for people to be ready to work, because we really do want to keep this to be a person-centered, assessment and role. And I think that the two different examples that you brought up in my mind are just, another thing that the employment person has to work with and understand that that's one of the, that would probably be what are the largest barriers to working or training. That could be one of those conversations. And it might limit some of the things that they are eligible for, just as anyone who might have a criminal record or ability. And so I think that that's really the way that we're hoping to do the training and approach, which I know is a question that was brought up before about what type of training. And so as Nick kind of pointed out, a lot of these questions are intended to be asked by someone who is not an employment specialist. They're going to be the person who's also trying to get through a housing assessment, in addition to a conversation that we here in the community of King County call diversion. And so that's to have a conversation very similarly to this, as far as being not a strict a script or a set of questions, but a very open and fluid, creative way to kind of identify different housing options or shelter options for individuals that come into the system. So, so again, we think that there might be some high reliance or whatnot at the beginning, maybe a little bit more on those housing navigator pieces. But then as we build that pathway A and the ability to connect directly to our workforce system, and that gets stronger, that will eventually be able to cover a little bit more ground there as well.
So let me just, as far as the training goes, because I know that was a question that I didn't really get back to. We do intend to provide some training for both the housing, the coordinated entry people, as well as the workforce individuals. And I think the just sort of the approach around that is to one degree or another. I mean, it's this idea of your people or our people. Our workforce providers frequently see people that are either homeless or unstably housed, and they want to know, should they even talk to them about employment? What can they do? So I feel like part of the training is helping to provide a good answer or response to that need. And then on the other side, again, as the more and more we do things like rapid rehousing or diversion, as Danielle talked about, the more I hear from housing people is we need to figure out how to get people the income they need to support their housing once they're housed. So it's a combination of training and really making this connection between the two systems to meet both systems, sort of gaps or unmet needs. So that's kind of the way I look at it moving forward.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Sure. Any other questions or comments, or anybody think we're completely way off? Or?
Hi, this is Hannah in Baltimore. Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure, go for it.
Thank you for sharing. This is great. I have two separate questions. The first is kind of specific to the conversation you're having around reducing barriers to access for employment services. So I'm wondering, with Pathway C, is it possible to be referred for those services at the same time that you're entered into Pathway A or B, or would an individual have to do one or the other?
No, I could certainly see somebody doing both, the Pathway C, whether it's applying for SSI, SSDI, or other types of benefits, and working on employment at the same time. They're not exclusive. It's not either this or that. I think the way we have it laid out is, acknowledging that, there are some people that will come through that want no part of employment, or, they're not. That's just not what they're interested in doing. And so, pathway C may be the primary area of focus. But yeah, both. People could be doing both. I think related to that is, making sure that it's clear about who would be responsible for the pathway C activities. And that's not going to be, for the most part, a workforce provider. We have to find, some other, or identify who else would be doing that.
And then my second question is, I like that this is a kind of informal conversation that doesn't involve a lot of checklists, but I'm wondering from this conversation what data is recorded, because here in Baltimore I'm trying to think too about how to increase the amount of data that we are able to pull from the coordinated access system. So I'm wondering from this conversation what kind of data you will have in your system about people's employment interests.
Okay, right. So I'm going to start this and then I'll let Danielle step in because she's more knowledgeable in this area, I think, than I am. So at a minimum, what we would do is have the coordinated entry person indicate that a referral is being made in one direction, pathway A, pathway B, or pathway C, that that's happening. And then, and this is something I think we're trying to kind of figure out. From there, we want to use our HMIS, our homeless, information system to track, initial income, employment status, education status, demographics, things like that, and then, moving forward, be able to track when people become employed, when they increase their income. We also want to figure out a way, and I'm not sure how we can do this exactly. We want to figure out a way to track enrollments in workforce-funded services. So if somebody comes through here and they end up in a WIOA-funded program, maybe through the Pathway A person, we want to be able to identify when that happens, and that may be a stretch, but that's one of the things that we want to be able to do, because again, I think that's part of. I mean, it's good information on a client level, person level, but it's also a really good indicator of how the systems are working together. So, and I don't know, Danielle, you can probably add in better information than that.
No, I think that was a good summary. I think the one thing that we're taking this opportunity through the Connections project, the Home and Work, is to also take a look at the types of data that we're collecting across all homeless employment services. So not just the one that we're talking about here as far as the Employment Navigator, but then also some of our more, like our county, our city, and some of our, foundation funding. Instead of asking all these different questions or having different types of outcomes and contracts, how can we closer align those and do it in a way so it's not duplicating a lot of things for, the not only the client who's being asked a number of different questions in different ways and at different times, but also for the provider who has to do that work as well. So that's another component that I would just add, is also in our conversations, so that way we do have data, because we do want to be able to track these things to figure out what's working well, what's not. It will inform our practice, but to hopefully streamline it a little bit better.
Yeah. What it does mean. Oh, I just want one more quick question, Marcel. I just want to add one more thing, Marcel. Is it does mean that we have, we're asking traditional employment people to programs to start using the HMIS, the homeless information system. So so that's a training issue, and other issues pop up there as well. So go ahead, Marcel.
Yeah, well, I was just going to add, I'm with the new homeless information system on. I'm not sure how it can track that employment piece, but I know that with the providers that are providing the Pathway B and such, those who are already in the mainstream workforce system are entering services into that system database as well, which is WorkSource Washington. And so since they're in both systems, they can pull data from that system as well to pair together with the HMIS.
Mm-hmm. Right, which is great. Yeah.
So Nick, Pathway A agency and Pathway B agency, you'd expect them to be doing a deeper assessment, if you will,
right.
a readiness assessment. Are you in your system thinking about any uniformity to that kind of determination?
We haven't thought of that at this point. That's probably a really good, question. Is because what I know is that these different programs, I think for the most part, have varying different types of assessment tools. So I mean, it's a question to look at, and I mean, the way I look at that is if they've got something that they feel works well for them now, whether it's our local One Stop or a community-based organization, if it works, no reason to change it. I think what I'm most concerned about is however their assessment tool might be used. Is it used to screen people out? Is it used to create? And I don't think it is with these agencies because we've tried to choose them carefully. Is their assessment tool used to set up, a multiple steps that people have to do to prove that they're ready to go to work? That's the type of thing I would be looking for. It's sort of the combination of how they're using the tool and what some of their.
Well, it also allows the COC to be more concerned around results and performance. Not around necessarily so much on how you do it. That is, if you're receiving triaged people experiencing homelessness to your employment service, you got to get them jobs. That's the idea.
Yeah, exactly.
So and you're going to be having your HMIS hopefully or your workforce system data set be able to monitor employment outcomes. So you'll find out, I guess, their assessments are working or not by the outcomes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our experience to date when we funded these programs is not to look closely, or ask that they use a particular type of assessment tool. It's more focused on outcomes and I think philosophy and approach.
While at the same time can be encouraging use of best practices.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, other questions or comments?
This is Heather from Houston. The only thing I was not necessarily a comment, a question about it, but one just to say, I think like from our perspective over here that this makes perfect sense. I mean, it's kind of how we're thinking about it too. Even though there's lots and lots of details to sort out. Generally, I think it makes sense. The one thing between John's questions and Nick's comments, and a little bit of Danielle too mixed in there, is if we or Heartland or whoever representing putting out something sort of to the lots of different communities, I wonder if it's worth saying, here's a standard set of questions that seem to make sense, and then here's a set of optional questions depending upon the community. Like to John's point about the question about undocumented or what was the other one? It was undocumented and
arrest warrant active.
Arrest warrant. Yeah. So like depending upon the community that you're in, we could have endlessly started adding questions. It can just get really out of hand only because all those questions, you're right. If somebody has an arrest warrant, you just wasted a lot of time trying to go down this plan when you should be figuring out that arrest warrant. But if you have one person out of 1,000 that have an arrest warrant, I don't know whether that's true or not, but then that's one more question that you just asked 999 people that you didn't need to. But it depends sort of on, I think, the community and what's happening there and how things play out, and then how much time and money and on both the client side and the system side are you wasting by asking questions, like the arrest warrant one. If you're spending $2,000 before you figure this out, and you could, maybe it's worth asking everybody that question. But the idea that you could put these additional ones in, like in a community like ours, undocumented probably is a big deal, just given where we are and who we are.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, the list can go on, and I guess we have taken this approach of keeping this sort of general, what are your barriers, and understanding this is in a context of a broader conversation around, you're homeless, you need housing, you need income, and hopefully these types of things will surface. I mean, we all know that people manage to get through some of our processes without divulging very important information. But yeah, I mean, that's the hope, is that will surface and be dealt with without having to go through a checklist of 1,000 questions.
So, but you're dealing, I mean, your presentation here, Nick, is simplifying this. It's the person walking to the hospital emergency room, and you're merely trying to say, do they need surgery right now, or they need to be held for 24-hour observation? Gross indicators, nothing deeply insightful or anything. Your purpose here is to welcome that person, find out if employment is part of their hope, and then connect them to somebody who can move them forward in that direction. So you're not making any judgment calls around whether they can or can't, should or shouldn't, or any of that. So in that way, I think the brilliance of your approach is its simplicity, and that you're bringing employment early on to the question when homeless people are coming in the door, whether employment is part of their solution to ending their homelessness. And so much as this does that, simply is exactly, I think, what's needed. All these other questions really are secondary.
So I'd like to jump in. This is Carrie, on Heather's suggestion about supplemental material, because the way I think about it is, and it gets back to my question about training staff. So it's not just that in addition to additional questions that people might want to ask, it's actually really additional information that may come up or that you may know about that's relevant to employment and to employment searches, and that I think people who, it would be good if the people who are asking what I agree should be a very simple, engaging conversation about interest, but they should be aware of. And if they aren't workforce professionals, they're just not going to know that. And so because you don't want to miss the opportunity to, not make a bad referral, right? To correct your referral instincts because you suddenly found out somebody, has a serious criminal background that can't be, that can't be changed. So going back to Heather's suggestion about maybe some additional information, and here's the other relevant information that you may hear about or somebody may ask about, that if you find out is going to be relevant to a person's employment search or employment pathway. And that's just kind of an FYI. And then I think those are the kind of things that, because what we're thinking about is what are the professional development needs of the frontline staff in both parts of these systems that the other system is expert at. And sometimes it's just basic stuff.
Right. No, I think your suggestion I like a lot. It sounds like not necessarily building into a long list of questions you'd ask, but highlighting some of the key things that a coordinated entry person should know in relationship to employment, and be on just on watch for to a certain degree. And I think some of those would also impact housing, but not necessarily all of them. And also, if the question comes up, what do I do with someone who's here undocumented? Can I move them forward? Just understanding, yes, you can. here's what you can expect, or here's what they can expect if they move forward. It won't be, everything. It will be a smaller, set of options. So I like that.
Nick, as long as we're kicking this around a bit, I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah.
In some ways, given the challenges that we've been experiencing over the years around homeless employment, how do you respond to the idea that this simple way to do the triage is just kicking the ball over to or the hot potato to the next guy? To really start to address this, because we don't have consistent approaches to how we include people in our employment services. Not everybody is, has an inclusive kind of framework. They're looking at, ruling people out because of, they're not sober for long enough, or they're not symptomatic free, or whatever the host issues that they might have. But all we're doing is pushing this to the Pathway AB agency.
Right. Yeah. So a couple thoughts. One is, what I think is one of the things that I think is really important is having the housing. The initial presenting problem is going to be around housing. And having embedded in that an acknowledgement that for many people, part of the solution is income and employment. And so again, it's really just starting that conversation, acknowledging that from the very beginning, so that you're not in a situation where we're going to deal with housing first, and then once your housing's stable, then we're going to talk about employment and income. That the two go hand in hand, and so that you start that conversation, those expectations from the very beginning, acknowledging that the people that have the expertise to sort of implement and fulfill that need around income employment are going to be the providers in the Pathway E, Pathway B areas. And so hopefully it's not a kicking the problem down the road to these different providers, but that they would intervene at a point, or come into play at a point where we've identified somebody who needs employment, needs income, wants to work, and then they do their thing, and they start from there. A lot of work needs to go into the whole employment arena that's somehow connected to either Pathway A or Pathway B, to do what you're talking about is to not screen people out, and to not try and make people fit into very narrow slots, but to say, here's somebody who's homeless, here's somebody who needs to increase their income, let's figure out how to make that happen. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I feel like acknowledging from the very beginning and really tying housing and employment together is what's most important for this.
This is Heather again. I think that's a really good point, John, and I think that's what, Nick and I have talked a lot about this stuff, this part of it too. And what I was saying before is I think it matters what your coordinated action system is in your community. If it's a coordinated assessment system, it's a little bit can-kickish. If it's a coordinated entry or coordinated placement system, that's the point of the system and why you would build it into it. Because coordinated access, I think in Seattle, and I know in Houston, it's a common assessment, it's a coordinated referral process, and it's the thing that keeps our whole system accountable. It's not just a referral. Ultimately, like Nick's saying, with the work that has to be done on the workforce on the back end, who you deliver this referral to, a lot of that work is all leading to, like in our housing system in Houston, you can't deny, there's only like 3 reasons you can deny a referral. And it's pure like eligibility criteria. It's the only reason you can deny a referral in housing. And our workforce is right there, coming in line second on that too. That's the only real reason to build it into coordinated, not only real reason, but one of the main ones is this accountability piece. that when they come to coordinated access, there should be so few denials, which means why it's so important for Heartland to be able to help the rest of us, the communities, figure out what is the assessment to make that match as close to as right the first time. Because it doesn't work if everybody's getting denied. It's sort of pointless.
Right. Well, the idea is to moving from triage into a pathway agency should be occurring, and they shouldn't be rejecting the referrals from the triage. That'll defeat Seattle's design. But it places its bet on the performance of the pathway agency, whether they use best practices, are they performing to the level that they need to be. I mean, you can't have a 20% entered employment rate if you're a pathway A agency with the triaged referrals you're getting. So the system will hold that pathway agency somewhat accountable, while at the same time, at least I hope and I imagine in Seattle, for those who are having trouble, will try to remedy it. What are they doing wrong or poorly that the agency needs assistance with to get better results? It moves the problem and the need to address it at the pathway agency, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I mean, this is, as we all know, this is sort of pulled out of a bigger plan, and and part of making that plan work is the whole, employment side that's connected to the two pathways, and mapping that out and getting people on board and aligned. So
parallel to what we're doing on the housing side, where as Heather, you were saying, the housers are accountable for working with the triage referrals they receive, and presumably achieving a certain housing retention rate.
Yep.
Well, nice job.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, and again, this is like, I think a lot of our projects. I mean, it is. We haven't thoroughly tested this out yet, so that will be what we'll be working on, moving forward. And it'd be great to stay in touch and keep talking about this, because I think what we're doing here, what you guys are doing in your communities, we can all learn from each other and help each other out. So.
That's a good next step, Nick, is you're going to be starting to implement this come March, you said. Heather, you're already underway, right?
Yeah, the assessment is built in, and we're finishing up the referral and the referral outcome. Yeah.
So we need to check in with some of the other, Chicago, where they see themselves. Phoenix is interested in this and is moving forward. So Baltimore seems like it's getting on the radar. So I guess I agree, staying together a little bit on this to see how these implementations go. And I would suggest that it may be, even somewhat premature to release anything being ideal for a coordinated entry system until some of the implementation, sort of the waters are tested, if you will, a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is Carl, and I think, John, I think you're right. I think there is some, there definitely is a need, I think, to review this and come back again once we've had, some more time to test these things. And I think just by the nature of, the amount of discussion we've generated here, I think it warrants another call, I think, down the road. So I'm looking forward. I mean, I think we can schedule it on our end to definitely bring this up again, because I think we've only sort of scratched the surface on the topic, and we'll definitely know more as we get really deeper into the work. There'll be more to bring up for sure pretty soon.
Just to let you know, Carl, and everyone, as part of the HUD TA that HUD is invested in, we're doing a webinar on this topic around June. So I'll even just throw out that maybe that's a target time for us to sort of summarize where we're at and what some of the initial implementation experiences have been. And maybe we wait till then before we release any kind of coordinated entry questions or approaches, and giving the communities a little bit more time to get some experience, not just ideas.
Right. Yeah, I think that does sound pretty good, and there's a lot. I mean, one of the things we were hoping to do is sort of distill everything covered in this call, so that will take, I think, some time. So what I can do on our end is sort of bring all what we've covered together, send back out to folks just if anyone has any additional feedback or any questions we didn't get a chance to cover. I know we're sort of getting towards the end of our time, but again, if anyone has any extra questions or things like that, when I send out this the follow-up information, we can sort of circle up then on that for sure.
Nick or Carl,
yes.
Send out what was on the screen as understanding that they're sort of drafts still?
Yeah. So this is Carl. I'll jump in. Yeah, I plan on sending out sort of everything, all the slides and things we covered here, and also the recording of this will be sent out to everybody as soon as I can sort of cut it down and get it ready for everybody. So expect all that in your inboxes as soon as I can do it.
Good. Great.
And everybody, this is Melissa. Everyone, this is Melissa. Just wanted to let you know that in our effort to continue to make sure that these calls reflect, what you guys are hoping to learn, we will be sending out to everybody a very, very short electronic survey that just asks a couple of questions to gauge sort of if this conversation was useful to you, what we could have done to make it better, and other topic areas that you want to continue to discuss. So just watch for that in your email inbox as well.
Yeah.
Good. Great.
And also, sorry, really quickly on that. So, and based on the feedback we get on this survey, I think it will sort of lead into our call in March. So just a reminder to hold in your calendar. I sent out calendar holds, but if you don't have one for March 23rd at 2 p.m., let me know and I'll make sure to connect you on that too.
Great.
Great. All right. Well, I think I know personally on our end we learned a tremendous amount from this call. I think it was really great. I sort of had a feeling that we would have some good discussion, and I'm glad that it really turned into that. So if people want to join me in thanking Nick and Danielle for I think their advice and sort of steering this call. Thank you both a lot from all of us.
Good. Well, thank you. I think the opportunity to actually explain this to all of you is helpful. I mean, it's we get sort of caught up probably in our own bubble here, and so having to explain it and answer some questions is it's very good for us. So I appreciate the opportunity. So
thanks. Yeah, I agree. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. So any follow-up questions, send them my way, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.